Hello, my name is Alejandro Sangelis, and today I'm going to be covering the poem Annabel Lee by Edgar Allan Poe. For starters, who was Edgar Allan Poe? On January 19th, 1809, in Boston, Massachusetts, one of the most infamous poets and literary geniuses of all time was born, Edgar Allan Poe. Poe's parents, which were descendants of the first Scottish immigrants in the U.S., as well as professional actors, both unfortunately passed away before Poe even turned 3 years old. He was then raised by foster parents John and Frances Allen in Richmond, Virginia. Throughout Poe's childhood and adolescent years, his foster father, who was a wealthy tobacco exporter, sent him to the most prestigious boarding schools and later on the University of Virginia. Poe succeeded effortlessly for the majority of his academic career. However, he developed a severe gambling addiction in college, amassing lots of debt, which caused Allen to financially cut off Poe, forcing him to leave the University of Virginia. From the years 1831 to 1835, Poe was living in Baltimore, Maryland, where his father was born, his birth father, that is. There he lived with his Aunt Maria Clem and his cousin Virginia, who was Clem's daughter. Poe grew a deep love and devotion to Virginia, who became the emotional fuel for a lot of Poe's literary works, as well as his future wife. The two got married in 1836 when Virginia was only 13 years old. Some additional information about Edgar Allan Poe's life is that he suffered from chronic alcoholism for over half of his life, and it gradually became worse and worse as he underwent different stages. His alcoholism, along with his other addictions such as gambling and smoking opium, heavily impacted his relationships and his literary works. Poe started working as an editor for the Southern Literary Messenger in Richmond, Virginia in 1835, but was let go because of his drinking issues. He went on to work as an assistant editor for Burton's Gentleman's Magazine in 1839. Poe's wife contracted tuberculosis in 1842, suffering immensely until her death in 1847. Her death devastated Poe and led to the creation of many poems, such as this one. This is an introduction to Annabel Lee, as well as an insight to the historical context of the era in which the poem was written. So the poem was written in 1849, and this is the era of the telegraph, the Mexican War, and most significantly, the American Gold Rush. During this era, there was a large economic boom in society, causing the U.S. population to increase significantly over a short period of time. This led to augmented levels of poverty and illness, which added on top of the very poor technology and medicine which existed at the time, meant that countless families and individuals were suffering. Although Poe didn't grow up in poverty, he ended up enduring it for years after his foster father's death in 1834. It was Poe's immense suffering and grief, caused mostly by the horrible conditions of the era, that inspired most of his poems. This includes Annabel Lee, which was his last complete poem before Poe died the same year. Here we have the full poem of Annabel Lee, which I am about to read to you. It was many and many a year ago, in a kingdom by the sea, that a maiden there lived whom you may know by the name of Annabel Lee. And this maiden she lived with no other thought than to love and be loved by me. I was a child and she was a child in this kingdom by the sea. But we loved with a love that was more than love, I and my Annabel Lee, with a love that the winged seraphs of heaven coveted her and me. And this was the reason that long ago in this kingdom by the sea, a wind blew out a cloud, chilling my beautiful Annabel Lee, so that her high-born kinsmen came and bore her away from me, to shut her up in a sepulchre in this kingdom by the sea. The angels, not half so happy in heaven, when envying her and me. Yes, that was the reason, as all men know, in this kingdom by the sea, that the wind came out of the cloud by night, chilling and killing my Annabel Lee. But our love, it was stronger by far than the love of those who were older than we, of many fair wiser than we, and neither the angels in heaven above nor the demons down under the sea can ever dissever my soul from the soul of the beautiful Annabel Lee. For the moon never beams without bringing dreams of the beautiful Annabel Lee. Of the stars never rise, and the stars never rise, but I feel the bright eyes of the beautiful Annabel Lee. And so all the night tide I lie down by the side of my darling, my life and my bride, in her sepulchre by the sea, in her tomb by the sounding sea. Now I'm going to show you and explain my TPCast chart for Annabel Lee. So for starters, the title of this poem, it can suggest that it's about Annabel Lee, like her life, or a course of events that may have happened to her, or just an overall description of her character. Now, I'm going to read an abridged version of what I perceive the poem to be saying. A long time ago, a woman named Annabel Lee lived in a kingdom by the sea. She spent her days fantasizing about the narrator and his love. The two were both young and naive, yet they cared for each other with a love so powerful that they were envied by the angels in heaven. For this reason, one day, Annabel was killed by a gust of wind from a cloud. Her royal family members took her body away from the narrator and laid her to rest in a sepulchre, a stone monument for the dead. The narrator is convinced that the angels caused her death out of jealousy. However, their love, according to the narrator, was so much stronger than any other love that his soul could never be severed from Annabel's. Thus, anytime the moon shines and the stars rise, the narrator dreams of his beloved Annabel as he lays beside her tomb by the sea. Now, the connotation that Poe uses throughout this poem is very significant to the overall meaning. He uses personification when describing the wind that killed Annabel in order to highlight the narrator's belief that the wind was an act of murder by the angels. Furthermore, Poe utilizes symbolism, with the sea representing a mighty and unforeseeable force of nature, and the moon and stars representing the cosmological magnitude of Annabel's beauty and the two's love for each other. Finally, Poe alludes to the Bible when he speaks of the seraphs in heaven that are jealous of the narrator and Annabel's love. Now for the attitude. The overall attitude of the poem is nostalgic and mournful, yet proud and adamant. Now, this is a continuation of the TPCast. For the shift, there's a clear shift in tone on line 27, where it says, "But our love, it was far stronger than the love, ... The narrator initially reflects his relationship with Annabel in a sorrowful manner and expresses his frustration with what the angels have done to her. However, he switches his attitude and refuses to let it keep him down, essentially vowing to never stop loving Annabel. Now, for a new perspective on the title after reading this poem, it can be concluded that Annabel Lee showcases the narrator's intense devotion to his slain lover. It enables the audience to feel like they're reading the narrator's final love letter to Annabel, as if this poem was written specifically for her. And it showcases how important Annabel Lee really is to the narrator. And for the overall theme of this poem, I believe it is that love must be appreciated, because the loss of it can be so devastating that it can consume you entirely. For a more detailed analysis of the poem, first we can start with the poem structure. The poem has 6 stanzas, 41 lines, and utilizes mostly iambic pentameter, which means that it's divided into 5 iambs or 10 syllables. And occasionally it also uses tetrameter, which means that it's divided into 4 iambs or 8 syllables. Since Annabel Lee follows a specific rhyme scheme and a formal meter, it's considered a traditional poem, whereas modern poems are more commonly associated with free verse. The passionate diction used in the poem fully expresses the narrator's never-ending love and yearning for Annabel during both her life and her untimely death. The genre of the poem is a ballad, which is a narrative poem that was designed for recitation or singing, which is why it kind of sounds like a song when you recite it out loud. The poem follows a rhyme scheme of A, B, C, B, with instances instances of internal rhymes sprinkled throughout the poem, which is rhyming within the same line in a poem, such as, "And so all the night tide I lie down by the side." Some examples of figurative language that Poe uses are definitely imagery, biblical and cosmological allusions, symbolism, alliteration, assonance, and enjambment over the course of the poem. The tone, to go into detail about the tone of the poem, the subject of the poem is the narrator's love interest, Annabel Lee, along with the tragedy of her death. The narrator feels melancholic and enraged about losing the love of his life, yet he holds a love for her so profound that it devours every fiber of his being. There's a clear shift in tone on line 27 from depressing to vehement determination. The shift signifies the narrator's inability to ever stop loving Annabel, no matter what obstacles the universe has in store for him. And the tone is that love must be appreciated, because the loss of it can be so devastating that it consumes you entirely, which is the theme stated before. Now for my thesis in regards to the poem and my 3 ace paragraphs. My thesis statement that I came up with was that in the poem Annabel Lee, Edgar Allan Poe utilizes tone shift, symbolisms, and the repetition of words and phrases to reveal how the narrator has drifted into madness as a result of losing his one true love, Annabel. For starters, Poe's use of a clear tone shift halfway through the poem showcases how the grief he's experienced from Annabel's death has become converted into an unhealthy obsession with her. At the start of the poem, the narrator, fueled by his denial, goes on a tangent about how the angels' envy was the reason, as all men know, and in this kingdom by the sea, that the wind came out at the night, chilling and killing his Annabel Lee. The narrator refuses to come to terms with the loss of Annabel, and instead turns to blaming exterior forces that are out of anyone's control, even associating them with human-like beings such as angels to make it easier for him to blame them. Later in the poem, after the tone shift in line 27, the narrator switches his mentality and focuses instead on how their love was and still is stronger by far than the love of even those who are older and wiser than them. As a coping mechanism, the narrator clearly vows to love Annabel every day, even in death, as a way of spiting the angels that took her from him, even going so far as to lie beside her grave every night. Furthermore, Poe also uses various symbols throughout the poem which relate to Poe's personal life to clearly display the difficult emotions the narrator is enduring, as well as the precariousness of his mental state. For instance, Poe uses the sea as a symbol for the unpredictability and indisputable might of nature. Not only does the sea represent the proclaimed angels that took the life of Annabel, but it also represents Poe's wife contracting tuberculosis in the real world, which she was similarly unable to survive. Knowing this information, the symbolism of the sea as a force to be reckoned with ties together Poe's grief and frustration with the grief of the narrator, giving insight on the desire to blame the universe when dealing with a massive loss, such as this one. Additionally, the moon and the stars at night, when the narrator goes to visit Annabel's grave, are symbols used to represent the cosmological magnitude of Annabel's beauty and the love that the two souls share for each other. This implies that the narrator feels as though his love for Annabel overpowers all other forces of nature, and that nothing else matters. Due to his stubbornness in this regard, the narrator will never be able to accept his partner's death and truly move on. Finally, Poe consistently deploys repetition in the poem to depict how far gone the narrator really is mentally, and the tunnel vision that he's experiencing as a result of Annabel's death. The narrator repeats the phrase, "My Annabel Lee," 3 times in the first half of the poem, mainly to show the narrator's depression that he's feeling from losing his lover, and his sullen discontent at the fact that she was taken from him. However, there's a clear distinction after the tone shift. The repetition alters slightly in a way that holds a significant meaning. The narrator's mindset becomes shrouded in delusion, and he begins to refer to her instead as the beautiful Annabel Lee. The beautiful Annabel Lee instead of his beautiful Annabel Lee. This shows that Annabel has become like a god of sorts in the narrator's mind, and that he's been overcome by the need to obsessively worship her and preserve the love he feels for her. That's it. That's it for my presentation, and now it's your turn to take a quiz on these poetic devices that you have learned throughout the lesson. I'd also like you to try and make a poem using the same rhyme scheme and meter as Annabel Lee, except with celebrity couples instead of the lovers in the poem. Be sure to implement a clear tone shift and at least 3 examples of literary devices. And here is the work cited for this project. Thank you very much.